America. China and Russia are feasting right now. China and Russia are feasting. They're getting anything they want. Easy money. Easy money, bro. Okay, there's a number on I'll just take the one because it's 717. Where's that guy at? You're an Ayn Rand fan? That makes me want to die. Makes you want to die. You're like a communist, basically. Here you go. Here's a number. You see, they trotted out Jordan Belfort to say that Trump wasn't insider trading. Yeah, we can trust that. Just like, yeah, let's not do any investigation. Let's just say it's true. Just saying things are true means they're true. I gave you the number, by the way. It's in the chat. I pinned it. But yeah, if the YouTube Shorts doesn't get going, then I might just go to bed, to be honest, because we're not gonna get any callers. It kind of kills the show then if I can't get callers. I'll have to go to TikTok, bro. I'll have to stream to TikTok. I'll have to stream right to TikTok, brother. Might as well. Nice. Nice, nice, nice.
Call.
Hello.
Hi. This is Dan.
How's it going?
Can you hear me?
Yep, I hear you good. What's up?
I was just interested in having a discussion/debate. Also, I have a YouTube channel of my own, and I often like to debate people. And I was wondering if it's okay with you if I post this call on my own YouTube channel as well.
Yep, good with me.
Okay. So as I mentioned in the chat, I'm both anti-Trump and anti-left. I'm a Ayn Rand fan. And I guess that gives us a lot to disagree about and some things to agree about as well. And there's many directions we could go, I guess. But I don't know if you have a preference on how we get into this, but I could say a bit more about my position, and then we could go from there. Or if there's a certain angle you want to come at it from, feel free to let me know.
Yeah,
You already said
whatever you want to
about
talk
Ayn
about
Rand
is
that were
good.
pretty whatever I want to talk about.
Oh, well, I think Ayn
okay.
Rand and just like objective, like anything that's along the lines of libertarianism, I think libertarianism is just as idealistic as communism. And communists and libertarians agree on a lot, especially on anarcho-communists and anarcho-libertarians. So I do view it as a pretty untenable ideology that is not very practical in like current politics. And I see that libertarians and communists or socialists often do not engage in like the two-party system. They don't vote in pragmatic ways, which means they don't really influence political power very often. So that's my overall position, like as far as like modern day political implications for like Ayn Rand and libertarian thought.
Okay, one thing I'm curious about is, have you read Ayn Rand? And if so, what have you read?
I have not read Ayn Rand for a while. I know a supporter of the channel in the Discord named Raislin in our Discord talks about Ayn Rand a lot, about natural law and that kind of thing. So we've had discussions about it, but I've not actually read Ayn Rand for a while. But I just go off of my conversations with like with individuals that typically would support Ayn Rand.
Okay, so it's been a while. How long ago was it roughly, and what did you read a long time ago?
I mean, probably I was reading. It was like a philosophy of consciousness course, probably like probably like three years ago in college, probably.
And Ayn Rand was writing about philosophy of consciousness.
It was about like free
or
will. It was
in
about like free will and objective reality and determinism, and it was like sprinkled in, but not too much.
I wonder what that was. All right. Well, anyways, so one aspect of I think Ayn Rand is often misunderstood and misrepresented. She's strawmanned a lot, and one position that she was very adamant in opposing was libertarianism. So a lot of people will associate Rand with libertarianism, but she actually tried to distance herself from them. She thought that they had hijacked or plagiarized her philosophy basically and took out one aspect of it and then tried to build a political system around that. But I wouldn't call myself a libertarian because libertarians, for one thing, they're often anarchists and they're opposed to the state or the government. And I'm not anti-states, nor was Ayn Rand. She thought there should be a state and a government, but it should be very limited in its role, basically to three functions: the police, the military, and the courts. But it shouldn't be doing, for instance, public education or Social Security or Medicare. There's lots of government programs which she thought were inappropriate, but she wasn't opposed to the government altogether. She just thought she thought it should be voluntarily funded, for one thing. There shouldn't be coercive taxation. There shouldn't be regulations. And its role should be restricted to just those three that I mentioned. So that's one reason I would differentiate myself from libertarians, because they often are in favor of like competing governments or opposed to government altogether. So that would be one way I would distinguish my view from theirs.
Well, if you're gonna go off like Ayn Rand and or like Adam Smith or others that would argue for a base level of like government and institutions, my big thing is whenever there's a lack of institutions from a public perspective, the private or shadow government gains too much power and it ends in some type of monarchy or a feudal system where there's no way to actually balance power or authoritarianism in the society. So my big issue with libertarianism and communism is that there's no mechanisms for balancing power, checks and balances, and I feel like there's a reason it's never worked anywhere because it always falls to some kind of dictatorship because it doesn't provide the necessary checks and balances or power structures to maintain freedom. There's not enough positive freedom. Ayn Rand and objectivist, or I mean, libertarians agree with a lot of it, but they care more about negative freedoms from government rather than freedoms government can provide, which is probably what I'm more concerned with, balancing those negative and positive freedoms, which I think Ayn Rand is definitely way too far to the libertarian side for what's tenable.
So she's opposed to coercion, and that's the reason. So when you say something like positive freedom, I think that means like, that would involve giving people stuff that's been taken from other people and coercively taken from other people without their voluntary consent. And that's what she opposes. And she would say that's genuine freedom means you are not subject to being forced by other people. You're free to act on your own judgment as long as you're not forcing somebody else. So
Yeah, but that's not
we might have a different
possible.
idea.
That's just not possible. When I say the application is not possible, in the same way that communism sounds nice, that sounds nice. It sounds nice to be equal or to not be, coerced into doing anything at all ever. But that's just not reality. We just cannot exist in that world because someone's always going to try to gain power, and someone's always going to try to maintain authoritarian power if possible. So that's why I would say we need a stronger government to protect freedoms, and also protect people from having their freedoms taken by corporate entities. Because you could say people are being coerced into doing something. I would say, well, if you don't have a strong government to coerce private entities into acting a certain way, those private entities will grow to be too big and coerce people eventually. And we see that with like Russia, especially, I mean, after post-Soviet Union, with the capital influences overtaking the economy and instituting fascism and I guess you could say communism as people would understand today. Mussolini, the market class, helped that reign authoritarianism. Adolf Hitler, they all played a role in taking apart the administrative state, the bureaucratic state. Hitler and Mussolini hated the bureaucratic state. Mao sent people from the bureaucratic state to work in the mines, and people yearn for the mines. They don't really want to be academics and all this fancy stuff that is in the managerial class. So like every time someone wants to have like a dictatorship, they always tear away at the government in terms of numbers, how many people have control over what the government is, but they never actually take away from overall power because it's not possible to restrict overall power and the authoritarian aspects of society if you don't have a strong mechanism to protect freedoms. And that's my biggest gripe is I just don't think it's really possible to survive.
Well, I would say those systems like Nazism and communism, there's a very large role for the state. It's very contrary the sort of system that Ayn Rand upholds, with these very limited role for the government. Um, like in communist Russia, you have the government controlling the food supply, and then you have famines, and you have these bread lines, and you have people, millions of people starving to death, as opposed to like a free market in food supply.
Oh, I'm not saying she
So
agrees with
I would
them. I'm
say,
saying that she leads to them. I'm saying in the same way that communism always falls apart. I'm saying that her ideology always falls to dictatorship because she has an unrealistic view of what you need to like deal with in society to maintain freedom.
okay, so I guess then a question is, how exactly does a system which, as one of its founding principles, says that the government cannot coerce other, anyone, can't initiate force against people, how is that going to lead to a total government takeover? I guess I'm not clear on what the mechanism is there.
Because you need a way to implement and enforce the laws that you have, or there's a power vacuum, and that power vacuum is going to be taken up by some force, whether it's private entities, whether it's a monarch, whether it's an army, whatever it is. There's going to be a power vacuum, and if we do not fill the power vacuum with some type of liberal democracy that has a strong protection for freedom, the power vacuum will inherently be seized by a bad actor, which is why I favor a liberal system like we have today more so, with a lot of refinements, because we still need to be in the business of orchestrating power on a huge level. The idea we can be completely free from, a coercion and still have a free society, it's just like, it's really idealistic for sure. That's why I said it's similar to communism, because, again, in concept, it sounds great, but we just have never seen these things actually like survive in practice.
Well, I think we have seen something close to it back in the 19th century in America. That might have been there's never been like purely the sort of system that Ayn Rand advocates, but maybe the closest there's ever been was late 19th century America, where there was a very limited role from the government. This is before the age of the New Deal or the Great Society, so you didn't have a massive welfare state, and you didn't have massive income taxes. Yet it was a time of a huge amount of progress for the United States, and you had millions of immigrants coming from around the world. This is not a society that descended into anarchy or dictatorship. It was a very prospering society with lots of growth, which was attracting people from around the world. Um, and the Statue of Liberty is the symbol of the freedom that was attracting people here. So I think there is some historical evidence that supports that a society that at least leans in this sort of direction can flourish and do very well, and it's not going to descend into dictatorship.
Well, the issue is if you're gonna have like extreme individualism and say that anyone who's successful, deserves it and they got it from merit, you're leaving out the reason many are successful and very rich is because they are ruthless. There's a reason that C-suite positions and corporate CEOs align more with narcissism, and many of them are sociopaths because it does take a very extreme human being to reach levels of extremely high wealth. And if you're just going to say that, if someone's successful and has more money, it's because they worked hard for it, you're ignoring many factors in a system that where that would not be the case. And typically, in like an Ayn Rand system, there's no check on if a small handful of people gets tons of power and money and wants to dominate society and control all aspects of society. There is really no mechanism for truly preventing monopolization or truly preventing oligarchy or truly preventing some type of plutocracy that spits in the face of freedom. And I would say a more active participant would make sense. And I think collectivism is necessary. Collectivism is necessary in protecting freedom, because if you don't have a collective whole reinforcing a structure that can maintain freedom, you really don't have that. You don't have any freedom. And I'm pretty sure that Ayn Rand was against like collective systems or any type of collective mentality, because it really was based on individualism and like whatever should happen. It's kind of like the free market is going to dictate what the best ideas are, who the best performers are, and what the best system of government is. But I would just say there's probably a reason why the only examples of communism and libertarianism, again, the only examples working are going to be in the 19th and 18th century. most likely, as far as like what is the most near example to where we are today in the year 2025. There's a reason the only examples you could think of are going to be that long ago, because it doesn't. Neither systems, libertarianism or communism, neither of them can meet the complexities of the modern world.
Well, I have to look to the 19th century to find examples that lean in that direction. Like I think Hong Kong is an example of a case, while again not purely free, it has a very largely is a free society, and it's done phenomenally well. So there are examples from later in history, to the extent that nations have freed their economies, they have flourished. And I think with the freeing up of China over the last several decades, it has also done very well. So that would be another more recent example of how when you adopt principles of freedom, it does lead to more economic success. I would also be interested in discussing the issue of individualism versus collectivism, because you mentioned collectivism, and it is true that Ayn Rand was opposed to collectivism and was pro-individualism. So I'm curious, like, what would be the justification for you or any group of people imposing your view of what is good or what is right on me? Like, if I want to spend my wealth in a certain way, what right do you have to tell me? Or like, we could take a historical example, Socrates, right? He was sentenced to death in ancient Athens because he was allegedly corrupting the youth. So this was a system where you had democracy, and I think democracy, if it means limited rule by majority, could be okay if you vote on trivial things like what are the color of the policemen's uniforms. But I don't think a democracy should have unlimited power where it can vote on things like, should someone have freedom of speech? Should someone have a right to his own property? Should someone have a right to live? But you had something more like an unlimited mob rule sort of democracy, where you had a majority of people who just decided, we as a collective, we're going to vote Socrates to death because we don't like what he's doing. I would say that's a bad system. That's a violation of his rights. Like, do you think it's appropriate for individuals to lack those kinds of rights in the name of collectivism?
Well, that's not the point. It's really what is the best tool for achieving the highest amount of freedom, because there's no such thing as a utopia, which I feel that Ayn Rand or libertarians or objectivists or communists would seek. And Hong Kong is a good example of how this is not true, because I mean, China's surveillance crackdown on Hong Kong is extremely terrible. Like they're not free in Hong Kong. I'm pretty sure the opposition party in Hong Kong is actually being forced to disband because of the Chinese secret police and surveillance state. So that's an example of how a free society or an attempted free society, if they don't have a military to back it, if they don't have an actual system in place where they can protect themselves or reinforce the laws they want, they're going to be overtaken by bigger authoritarian power. So I think Hong Kong is actually a pretty self-defeating point. But I would also say, just like, that's why we have the Constitution. It's a balance of positive and negative freedoms. That's why we have due process. And a big thing right now, if you say you don't like the left or Donald Trump, if you cannot, and this is an issue I have with.
I lost you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Sorry. You hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say for like Donald Trump, the issue right now, if someone cannot see the very stark contrasts when it comes to freedoms between Trump right now and the Democratic Party, when Trump is advocating that he can violate the due process of pretty much anyone using the Alien Enemies Act and the Insurrection Act and ship them off to an El Salvador super max concentration camp essentially, and have zero regard to bring them back, or zero plan, or they're purposely violating rights and court orders right now, and they're purposely violating due process, making the argument that these illegal migrants, these gang members, don't deserve due process. And it's like, well, how do you know they're gang members? And it's like, well, they're sending innocent people there because they're violating due process. And it's probably going to happen eventually, where they detain a U.S. citizen and deport them to not even deport, but kidnap them and send them to an El Salvador supermax prison. So when it comes to like mob rule and that kind of stuff, that's why we have due process in our systems of courts. And I think the U.S. nails it pretty good with the Constitution, with the balance of positive and negative freedoms. But I also think that this ideological thinking, when I said at the beginning of the conversation, it kind of paralyzes individuals that believe in it, because they don't vote for which I feel is the obvious more pro freedom party, which is the Democrats now, in the current politics, because they're going to be so dissatisfied with the current system being so far from what they want. So they're kind of just like useless political actors in 2025. I know that was a lot, but
Yeah, well, just to respond to some of that, I'm very anti-Trump, as I mentioned in the chat. So
Yeah.
I think what Trump has done is horrible, and there's the rule of law is definitely under threat now with Trump in power, and I think it may well be the case that the Democrats are the lesser of two evils. I would say, but I would still say they're evil
Okay.
because I don't think either party respects rights nearly to the extent. Like I don't think either party wants to totally abolish something like Social Security or Medicare, and these are programs that are coercively taking away people's income and funneling it to whatever their
Well, I
preferred
have one question then.
group is. Yeah.
One of my main questions would then be, is there a political party anywhere in any society that existed after the 1900s began that you would say is a political party that got power, was able to wage power, and that would satisfy, the level of freedoms that you would want? And that's my big question for everyone, or even like right now in the U.S., if there's any third parties winning anywhere, or able to at least influence policies in a good direction. But like, it seems that you could say they're both evil, but I would probably say that, and you might agree, by the way, you might agree that every politician ever has been some form of evil. Like not everyone's gonna everyone's gonna have their own drawbacks. But do you have an example of a party you are satisfied with, or are you just kind of like dissatisfied with the state of politics in general?
I am dissatisfied in general. I don't think there is any party out there that, at least not any major party that represents my views. There is a party like called the American Capitalist Party, which might just be a name. I don't know if it's actually like run for any offices, but these are people who have used objectivism as a framework for putting forth a platform. But most people have never even heard of this. So if we're just talking about parties that are actually having a large influence and have a large recognition, no, there's none out there that I support. What I support is it's a very long run sort of vision, which I don't expect to take hold in the near future. But I think if this country is going to move in a better direction, we should adopt Ayn Rand's sort of principles. But how you best get to that end goal is another discussion, whether it's through electoral politics, or is it better to focus on cultural issues and try to, for instance, like change the state of education in the country? There's a debate to be had as to what is the best means to get there, and it could be a multi-front battle, right? You fight it on the in electoral politics as well as in other areas, in the arts, in the culture. But it's a very long run sort of goal. So I'm under no illusion that this philosophy is going to take hold next year. It's a much longer game that I'm playing, but I think it is the right game, and I think it's the proper system, the one that actually does respect people's rights. So, and if we look at history, to the extent that these have been tried, I do think the evidence shows that it works well. As for Hong Kong, yeah, I do think it should have a military, and I think to defend itself from aggressors like China. And if we had a better foreign policy, if many countries around the world had better foreign policies, that could help prevent takeovers from authoritarian regimes like China. But when I mentioned Hong Kong, it was because they decades ago, before China took them over in the last few years, it had flourished a lot once it had adopted more free market principles. That was the point of bringing up Hong Kong as an example.
Well,
but it does also need to have a military.
Yeah, on the point of coercion, and it is. Do you think it's coercion do you think like the Civil War or like the Civil Rights Act were coercion to force them to free the slaves and also to force them to go to school with black people?
Well, forcing to free someone, I think is not the right way to look at it. Rather, it's retaliatory force. So so Ayn Rand's principle, her most fundamental principle in politics, is that you should not initiate the use of force or start the use of force. But what is appropriate is to use force in retaliation. So force was initiated against the slaves, the black slaves, and then force was used to stop that initiation of force. So it was retaliatory force, and that's justified. That was good. Or just like a murderer who goes around killing people. He's initiating force, but if the police shoots the murderer, he's using retaliatory force, and that's justified.
Well, here's
So
the
the
hard
Civil
question
War, I
too.
would say, yeah.
This is where it gets even
Go ahead.
harder because when you say retaliation, so another thing, for example, would be like after the 2008 financial crisis, the government did the Dodd-Frank Wall Street reforms, and one big one was the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And you can argue that was retaliation for companies that might screw over people or that might steal money from those who they're serving. If a bank screws someone over on like an interest rate or whatever it might be on a savings account, or if they close someone's account or debanks them, you could argue the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau would be like a big government entity that was made to be a retaliatory effort to combat the corruption of like big banks. And then if they enact policies on the American people that could see it as aggression, such as monopolizing an industry or purposely harming individuals and cutting them off with natural monopolies and all this other all these other kind of actions. This is where it becomes an issue, because then I would say that it's justified to have government expand to protect people from big companies screwing them over, polluting their water. If a big company dumps cancerous chemicals next to me, which is an issue with the black community today as well, one big issue for the crime rates is because black people grow up in poison, essentially, and a lot of chemicals, a lot of black people in urban areas that have been neglected, especially. And those issues have not been fixed. How do we fix those issues? Because I would consider that to be a form of like I don't like the word violence, because people will use that in like a social justice warrior term. But yeah, I guess what mechanisms are too far then to combat these things, or how do we combat those?
Well, I think property rights needs to be clearly defined. That's at least part of the answer. So you can't have just people dumping. If you have a river and then it's not privately owned by anyone, then no one has the right to sue in court. Like if you violate the rights of whoever whoever owns the river. So if you have riverside property, maybe the way it would work in a free society of the sort that I envision is that river would be privatized. And so maybe you own part of the river, and if someone does something to pollute your part of the river, then you can sue them, take them to court. But if you just have lands in common where they're not privately owned, then you might have people dirtying the water, and there's really nothing that can be done about it because no one in particular's rights are being violated because no one owns it. So I think private property is one of the solutions to things like polluting rivers that you mentioned.
Well, the issue is like right
But
now
there,
they already pollute public land knowing they could be sued or have a fine or whatever. But they just have enough money to withstand the legal suits. They'll pay a small fine and move on with their business. So it seems that having another mechanism to enforce that would be worthwhile. And we have examples of private property and private ecosystems being completely decimated and completely destroyed. And I probably would say, if someone's private property includes the only water supply in town, then it's like, sometimes we can't wait until someone acts upon us to, go back after them, because we know we have limited water, we have limited resources. So it's just like, and when they can use their money to buy the political system, it just seems we're playing a lot of catch up here. And it seems that, after a while, we're going to end up building the same liberal democracy that we have now, or like that our founders framed in the Constitution. So I guess like, do you have issues with the Constitution? How the Constitution is done? Is there any like, do you think it goes too far on, I don't know, big government, or too far on collectivism, or are there aspects you disagree with that you would change?
yeah, there are. I think the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, is a great document in human history. I mean, I think it's a vast improvement over what existed before. And I would also say that about I think the Declaration of Independence is also a great document. Before that, you had monarchies and you just had kings and aristocrats lording it over other people. But for the first time in human history, you had a society that was founded on the rights of all men, right? All men are created equal. And then tragically, that wasn't applied to blacks, but then a civil war was fought that eliminated that inconsistency with the founding principle of this country. But that founding principle, I think, was excellent. And it was not perfectly implemented, I would say, in the Constitution, but very well. So one of the areas of the Constitution which I would disagree with is the ability of Congress to tax, or maybe I'll mention now the ability of the president to pass executive orders under alleged emergencies, to pass tariffs. Now, maybe that was added later. I think in the 70s, there was some, I forget the name of the act, the Emergency Powers Act. But over time, and even from the beginning, I think there have been problems with the Constitution. So one thing I would change about it is the ability of the government to tax, because I think it's wrong to coerce people. So if taxes are coercively taking people's money, I would say that's a violation of their rights. And I don't think if you get a bunch of people together, going back to the idea of mob rule, I don't think that justifies and makes right the taking of people's money, just as it doesn't justify taking Socrates' life, even though a majority of people happen not to like what he was doing.
Yeah,
So,
but I mean, I'd rather people
yeah,
vote
go
on
ahead.
that rather than just like a dictator kill political opponents. Like right now globally, my main point is we either have dictatorships or liberal democracies or some combination, maybe some underdeveloped countries or underdeveloped democracies. There's a whole range. Today we have some form of democratic institution or some form of government that's authoritarian to maintain order and to maintain structure. So one can argue that some level of coercion is necessary for a liberal democracy or any democracy at all, any free society to survive, where we at least strive to have the government serve the people, represent the people for for the people by the people, and how the government represent people enough so they're happy, they can vote and have their tax dollars reflected in a way, and have the budgets reflected in a way that they would suit. Because right now in America, for example, if we went to a system where everyone just like gave what they wanted to give and it was not coerced or whatever, we'd be in a system very quick where China dominates the U.S. We fragment because no one wants to fund military or whatever. Then we'd have to find ways to fund these different programs to keep us stable. So that's the big issue. Like globally right now, and globally for a while, we've had democracies or dictatorships, and it seems that a liberal democracy that has some coercion is necessary to maintain freedom. Because once we take that apart, we become very nationalist or very individualistic, and then we lead to world wars, or we lead to conflict, or our countries and economies become pretty destabilized. And when I'm voting, I'm usually looking at like, what is the government, what is the global government, what is the range of possibilities, and how can I vote in a way that's going to suit the best possible outcomes, in the current system. Because I'm not happy with it, obviously, but I'm still going to vote for. I'm definitely a lesser of two evils voter for that reason.
Okay, so I mean, as for funding the government, like you said, you don't think people are going to voluntarily do things like give enough money to support the military. I actually have a video on my channel, which, by the way, is just my name. If anyone wants to check it out, Dan Norton 1 on YouTube. Norton is my last name. The video is called "How to Fund the Government Without Taxes," and one of the things I say is that the societies can be radically different if it's along the lines of what Ayn Rand supposes. So you can't just imagine we have these trillion-dollar programs like Social Security and these multi-hundred billions of dollar programs like Medicaid and Medicare, and we have to somehow come up with the money to fund those. I actually don't think you can, right? If that's the kind of society we're talking about funding, yeah, I do think you're not going to be able to fund it by voluntary means. You only can fund that by coercing people. But if you have a free society where you're not collectivizing people's retirements or their health care, then you don't have these trillion or hundreds of billions of dollars programs to fund. Also, you don't have wars like wars in Afghanistan that go on for decades